Hello, everyone. Welcome and thank you for taking the time to come to my talk on what they don't tell you about leadership. As we get settled in, I'd love to be able to hear from you all in the chat on what aspects of leadership you may find intimidating or are wary or uncertain of. And if you're actually a current leader, love to be able to go ahead and hear what aspects of leadership may have surprised you. Would love to go ahead and hear from you. Looking forward to seeing some responses in the chat, hopefully here. Now, before we get started, a quick disclaimer. Following presentation is not reflective or meant to represent positions or opinions of my company. This presentation is purely reflective of my own thoughts and experiences. With that out of the way, let's get into it. I'm going to kick it off with a quick introduction, talk about just two of the potential leadership tracks. By the way, there are many leadership tracks out there, but the main point I want to get across here is that there is more than just the one. Then I'd like to get into the 5 key points that I've reflected upon during my time in leadership. I do want to wrap it up with some tangible action items that you can actually work on to be prepared, set yourself up for success, as well as leave some time for Q&A. So if you do have questions, please be sure to drop it into the Q&A section. If I can go ahead and address it throughout my presentation, I will. If not, we'll go ahead and get into the end. All right, so this QR code up here will take you over to my LinkedIn. I would be more than happy to connect with you over there, so please feel free to go ahead and give me a little bit of a holler. All right, so a little bit about me. I'm Los Angeles. I graduated from the University of Texas at Austin and have stuck around in Austin ever since. I mean, I really love this city. I really enjoy reading, yoga, hiking, watching films, supporting farmers markets, thrift shopping, and traveling. And I'm not going to lie, Austin really caters to a lot of what I love here. I am passionate about promoting women and people of color into tech, especially cybersecurity. I'm a board member for our local WeSys Austin affiliate chapter for women in cybersecurity, as well as a board member within my own company's internal ERG to promote women in tech. So what do? I am a national pre-sales consultant and advisor to companies who are looking to de-risk their decisions and align to their business outcomes by securing their environment and reducing risk. So basically what that means is that I provide vendor neutral guidance on the best solutions based on a company's use case, requirements, and long-term business outcomes. I do this by providing education, guidance, qualifying and comparing requirements, showcasing ROI by use cases, and also demonstrating manufacturer solutions in our lab for a transparent, low pressure and exploration environment. So yes, I am an individual contributor now, but I did spend 3 years as a people leader managing an array of SEs with varying experiences. So I'll get into that. One of the reasons I wanted to go back into my SE role was to ensure that I was able to live out my core values properly. So I will be talking about core values later on as well. Why am I talking to you today? I'm going to assume if you're here, you're interested in leadership. Now, unfortunately, there is only so much that we can learn from theory like you would find in books. There's literally hundreds of books out there that will help you get started. It'll help you cover the basics, such as exploring different leadership styles, creating a transition plan, delegating, etc. And there's only so much we can learn from practice through something like mentoring, being a team lead. But nothing compares to learning from your mistakes firsthand. As a self-proclaimed bookworm and mentor, I can attest that learning from your mistakes, your experiences provide so much more wisdom. But as a first-generation Mexican-American, I've also observed that certain folks aren't always granted the grace and allowed to make so many mistakes. So please take this opportunity to go ahead and learn from mine. And just as a reminder for those who just joined in, the QR code here takes you to my LinkedIn profile. Please feel free to go ahead and connect with me there. All right. So one thing I want to make clear is that there are many paths to what can be considered leadership. The traditional, most well-known path is people leadership. For some organizations, unfortunately, this might be the only way to elevate yourself or get promoted. This approach highlights being able to nurture, grow, challenge, and coach your team to success and deliver on goals. Another track that I did want to go ahead and highlight for the sake of awareness here is technical leadership. These folks are considered to be thought and practice leaders. Their roles focus more on technical areas of focus and how to further business goals and outcomes through their strategic solutions and deliverables. Their titles can include senior, architect, practice lead, among many others out there. And although technical leads may not have directs, they usually still have the respect that comes with leadership due to their influence and impact on the organization. They have that cultural clout, if you will. Something I am obligated to point out here is the Peter Principle. And I would be curious, can you actually let me know in the chat if you have heard of the Peter Principle and if you're familiar with it? I'm curious. But if you're not familiar with the Peter Principle, it's actually started off as satire. There was an observation that folks are continually promoted to their level of incompetence. Then once you get competent, if you're able to get competent, because that can be a hurdle within itself, you get promoted again. But something that the Peter Principle is highlighting is that our career journeys aren't always linear in terms of just upping our responsibilities or scope of our current role into the next. The skill set you worked so hard to build and master will only help you so much in a different role like leadership that requires a completely different skill set. Sad thing about this is that companies continue to move some of their best performers into people leadership roles where they have to build out and really work on creating that other skill set if they're willing to, rather than creating a plan, a path for technical or another means of leadership for them. You should keep this in mind as you're starting to explore some leadership options, especially if you're aiming actually to go towards the technical path. Be ready to work with your leadership team to create a path of opportunity for yourself there. I think I jumped a little bit way too ahead there. All right, for today, we are going to specifically focus on people leadership, but keep in mind these principles are best practices and skill sets that should be adopted regardless of what your role might be. They're good human skills. All right, let's talk about the purpose of people leadership and why you may want to actually reconsider if none of this is resonating with you. First and foremost, it's not about you anymore. Your purpose is to uplift others. Your success becomes your team's success. Literally, success is measured by how effective each individual member of your team is able to be. You spread the credit of wins, but you also take on the blows of mistake to an extent. You're expected to let go those who aren't able to perform. You also create a succession plan by finding potential leaders and helping them hone their strengths and, of course, further build out their leadership skill set. So hopefully this is not a surprise to anyone. All of this should be making sense. So I talked about uplifting others, but also about letting go of folks. Let's be honest, companies may hire based on tangible skills, but oftentimes they fire based on intangible skills. What are those intangible skills? I'm talking about emotional intelligence. Good news is that you can work on improving this. If you were able to attend Deidre's talk earlier on conflict resolution, then you're already way ahead of the curve here. If not, be sure to go back and take a look when the recordings get released. Now, I will admit that this was a newer idea for me, and I learned a lot about myself and how to reset some of my paths of thinking to be more mindful of my own social impact. I also had to be mindful of how my own cultural norms growing up differed from corporate America norms and having to strike a balance between being my authentic self, but also being corporately professional. We have to be realistic here. I don't have too much time to dig deeply into this, but I want to give you enough to at least gain awareness and get started on your journey of strengthening your skill set. Emotional intelligence doesn't mean you're just naturally extroverted. It's made up of, firstly, your own self-awareness. Are you aware of how your emotions may impact others and how others' emotions may actually impact you? How do you react? Self-management is actively regulating your own emotions so that they don't become disruptive. This also means that you're still able to be proactive despite obstacles that might come your way. Social awareness and relationship management are all about your ability to pick up on what others are feeling, how they're reacting to you. Can you resolve differences without either party becoming upset? All of this is incredibly important to be able to go ahead and work on. It does not come naturally. It's important to go ahead and keep building up that skill set so that you'll be an effective communicator and being able to be radically candid with your directs and giving them actionable feedback that will actually help them in their role. If you're too aggressive or if you're not direct enough, your feedback won't be delivered with any kind of impact or received with any of the impact you intend. Moving on, you also need to keep in mind every person's individual preference when it comes to their ability to receive and give information. For example, I am a huge visual person. So if you're trying to explain a solution or a concept to me without some sort of visual for me to digest, whether it's something like conceptual architecture or even just data, it's going to take a little bit longer for me to be able to process that. There are a ton of communication preferences models you can follow. Honestly, these are quite similar to personality frameworks as long as you're honing in on the communication or relationship aspect. For example, the one that my company uses is called Emergenetics. And it determines if you have a majority preference in one of these 4 categories. Social, meaning you're more relational, intuitive about people, learn from others. If you're a leader giving feedback to a social person, you'll want to prioritize how they're feeling, provide support, and be mindful of how that feedback can impact their own relationships. For example, we all know to give critical feedback in private, never in public. Well, you really shouldn't do that with someone who has a social preference because they're very mindful of all of their relationships and how they're perceived. And if you are in fact somebody with a primary social preference, be aware that your compassion for others may be misconstrued as being overly sensitive. It goes both ways. So it's important to understand how you can both message and receive communication like feedback. Moving on to analytical. Meaning you're a logical problem solver, data-driven, learn by mental analysis. If you're giving feedback to an analytical person, make sure you know what you want to say. If you're trying to figure it out as you go, rattling off thoughts going everywhere in your head, this may drive them mad. So be accurate, be objective, and even better if you can provide some evidence there. There's also conceptual, meaning you're imaginative, more of a visionary. You can learn by experimenting. Giving feedback to a conceptual person is best when you can tie it all back to the bigger picture. How does this feedback impact the person's future? If you're conceptual, you may come off as a bit inattentive, so be sure to be mindful of how you can tie everything back into practical steps if you are trying to go ahead and communicate to your upline. Last but not least, structural, meaning you're a practical thinker. You appreciate consistency and guidelines, and you learn by doing. Folks, these are the people that keep the order. Give them an agenda, allow them to be prepared. Make sure your feedback is timely, clear, and more importantly, actionable. What can they do about it? Can you guess which one I am in the chat? It's not too difficult to figure out, but I'm curious if y'all are able to pick up on it. To sum up the point here and the importance, everyone has different communication preferences. And as a leader, you should keep this in mind as you're giving and receiving feedback, giving and receiving recognition. Yes, everyone has preferences there as well. Setting goals, what's going to resonate with goals, like how will an individual person make it actionable for themselves, resolving disagreements, which I gave a little bit of examples in the feedback there, all the way to just running an effective meeting or giving presentations, because everybody has their own preferences. Let's move on up to managing up. So I just talked about why it's so important to understand the communication preferences of all of your directs. Well, this also applies to your upline. Upline coaching or managing up is the concept of being able to effectively work with your upline by being proactive and giving them feedback as well. Yes, this is its own concept, as this can be quite intimidating. It's an intimidating endeavor, and rather than avoiding giving feedback to your upline, you should be looking for opportunities to be proactive and problem solve together. This is really what's going to allow you to get to that quote unquote next level of being more of an organizational leader. It also allows you to be a lot more empathetic in how your directs may be feeling and why they might be hesitant to give you feedback. You're putting yourself in their shoes. So first and foremost, a relationship of trust has to be built and prioritized with your upline. That way you can get to the point of both understanding and aligning to priorities. Get into a regular rapport of discussing challenges and possible solutions. You got to get comfortable with the uncomfortable sooner rather than later. You want to get to the point where you can start to anticipate your upline's needs and be proactive. We all get frustrated by the notion of like, why can't my partner read my mind? Why can't my directs read my mind? Well, being very conscious of practicing managing up and upline coaching allows you to be able to go ahead and get to that point and become that it person. But being able to get to that point is impossible without first building up that proper foundation first. And all of that starts with creating a predictable expectation of transparency. So really prioritize being able to go ahead and build trust from the get-go. Lastly, I'm going to end on probably the most important reflection point here, which is to define your core values. If you've already explored your core values, it would be great to see if what some of those are, if you can put them in the chat there. This is a concept that feeds back into your emotional intelligence in regards to your own self-awareness, ability to self-reflect, understanding your motivators, what drives you, what's going to make you content and feeling honestly fulfilled in your life. You may have seen that mine were mentioned in the beginning. I'll talk about my top one. My top value of growth helped me realize that I needed to prioritize my own growth in actively learning and establishing my own goals in order to ensure I'm getting my own sense of fulfillment rather than relying on my own team and trying to live through them. So my prompt for you would be to understand your values. Spend some good time here self-reflecting, trying to figure out what those are going to look like. My company uses Maxwell values from John Maxwell, but if you just go ahead and Google core values list, you're going to get a ton of them out there. And I challenge you that if some words are already coming immediately to mind, like integrity, legacy, courage, journey, challenge, those are probably a good indicator that those are probably your core values. Think about what's going to define you, what's going to define your moral compass. So once you go ahead and define what those values are, then ask yourself, right now, are you able to truly live out your values, or are you compromising on them somewhere? Do your values reflect an aspect of leadership? Can this carry over or be interpreted in some way over to leadership? Whether it's people leadership or technical leadership, this should really help you determine and map out what your potential career roadmap can be. All right, folks, I told you I would give you some actionable, tangible action items here. So with core values top of mind, I'd advise you to prioritize discovering what those core values are if you're not already aware. Take some time to understand your communication preferences, how you can lean into this as a strength, and how you can articulate to any person, whether it is your upline or simply just your friend, on how to explain something to you if you're not quite understanding what they're saying the first time around. So for example, I know that if somebody's not giving me a solid metaphor, I'll ask them to re-explain it or just break it down from a logical perspective. Consider some of the various leadership paths out there. The world is your oyster. Be sure to explore many options out there, whether it's people management, technical, project management, C-suite. There's tons to be able to go ahead and consider. And then last but not least, seek a mentor, not just for their guidance and wisdom, but also to talk through everything that was discussed here today and what their own reflections on their career journeys have been. I'll leave you with the takeaway that even though our careers can feel tumultuous and complex, we have each other to be able to go ahead and lean on for guidance and support. So with that in mind, I want to give a big thank you to all of the organizations out there like Day of Security for being able to go ahead and get women in cybersecurity together so that we can learn from each other. And that's it, folks. So I want to thank everyone immensely for taking the time to listen to my reflection points here today. Please feel free to ask any questions that may be top of mind here. Okay, and to my understanding, there is a lag on the question, so I am going to go ahead and give it a little bit of time. I do see a private, well, not private, a direct message. You mentioned hundreds of books out there. What are your recommendations? This is a fantastic question because I have read a lot of books. So my top books are very personal to what my own challenges were within leadership. But to name a few, Radical Candor by Kim Scott. She really helped me to be able to go ahead and deliver effective, actionable feedback to my directs. I got to give a shout out to my girl from Austin, Texas, Brene Brown. She wrote a book, Dare to Lead, that's all about being a vulnerable leader. And this is incredibly important if you've been the person that holds things tight or if you have trust issues. Being able to go ahead and understand that by being vulnerable, you can create very sincere and effective relationships. Highly recommend Dare to Lead. And then for folks that are actually aiming for technical elevation, highly recommend Deep Work by Cal Newport. Any other questions here? The slides will be in our Slack channel. So if you haven't already been added to the Day of Security Slack channel, be sure to go ahead and shoot out a message to our support team because it'll be in the #conference_session _resources. But my slides will be there and I'll go ahead and be sure to notate my resources as well. So if you did want to dive into some concepts like emergenetics, values, or even the Peter Principle, you can go ahead and check those out. Okay, if there are no other questions, then again, I want to thank everyone immensely for their time today. Hope everybody has enjoyed all of the talks and discussions. Thank you and have a fantastic day.